Hi everyone, welcome to Communication and Conflict, promoting mindful communication and growth through conflict. And this is also a podcast on Anchor.fm or Apple Podcasts and other platforms as well, under the name Chaos, CAOS. So today I want to talk about something that can often be seen on social media. I've seen posts recently on LinkedIn and Facebook and articles about the same idea. And that is the idea that we should stay away from negative people, or energy vampires, as they're sometimes described as well. Um, uh, and I kind of always find this whole idea a little bit interesting, as a way of kind of approaching life and approaching our interactions with other people, because um, unfortunately there's kind of quite a downside to seeing things that way, in that it makes us powerless, and it also can have some kind of fairly difficult ongoing consequences for us if we do practice that kind of way of doing things, either because we've seen that that's what we should do on social media, or giving acknowledgement that we all have our own capacity to make our own decisions anyway, that actually sometimes it's kind of it's a spontaneous reaction to a difficult experience with another person anyway, that kind of idea arises. So I want to kind of go through why I say what I'm saying, and also why I've included in the title that as a consequence of doing that, it often leads to a form of agoraphobia, and also there's an element of hypocrisy within that idea as well. But ultimately, the thing about it is it means we kind of render ourselves powerless in a difficult situation, rather than be able to acknowledge the power that we have in any such situation of interacting with other people. Um, and because of that powerlessness, it becomes a kind of an ever decreasing circle, or a spiral downwards, that means that actually ultimately it doesn't work as an idea. So as I say, I want to kind of go through why I say that. So often when you see these kind of articles or videos that say, stay away from negative people, people who are energy vampires, as it describes, they'll often start with a similar kind of approach by saying, those times when you're in a social situation or a workplace situation, and you start talking to someone and they seem really kind of down about things, and you kind of listen to them, and when you leave them you feel really worn out and tired, and like you've had the life sucked out of you, which is where this idea of an energy vampire comes from, I guess. um, and it goes on to say, so basically in future, the way to kind of not have that happen to you is to avoid people like that. So effectively it's saying that the only choice we have in such situations is just to avoid people like that. And what sometimes then happens is there's going on to perhaps identifying signs of negative people or energy vampires, so that you kind of recognize the kind of the caution sign, and you can get yourself out of there as soon as possible. And the whole point about this is that, well, it's hypocritical, because first of all, my very projection onto someone that they're negative is being negative. So ultimately, I'm being the very thing that I'm seeing in another person. And a lot of people won't like to hear that, because they'll say, "Oh no, no, no! I'm always really positive, and I just don't like it when I hear people moaning and groaning and being down about things." And interestingly, just as a little aside on that, the whole thing about mental health difficulties and people being able to talk to people how about when they're feeling down is slightly kind of challenged by this idea as well, because apparently we're not only are we perhaps asked to consider listening to people who have difficult situations, but on the other hand we're also told to avoid them because they're negative. So there's all of those kinds of little hypocrisies that come into it as well. And sometimes these posts are by the same people, which is what interests me. that they're saying, oh, we should acknowledge that people feel down and depressed and give them space and acknowledge their mental health challenges. But then their next post is avoid energy vampires. So yeah, I just kind of let the lack of what I call mindfulness that I kind of want to try to promote through this channel of what we're actually saying when we say certain things. But the other thing about it is that uh, say in time I do start to think I've identified lots of people who are negative and I seek to avoid them. What that means in time is I'm not going to go out. I'm going to be too at risk of bumping into one of these negative people. And it might be that I've identified specific people I see as negative, or it might be that I have a general understanding of what's negative and what constitutes an energy vampire. And so I then kind of don't go out at all because I keep seeing these people everywhere, because I will see people like that everywhere, because we all have times when we're negative, when we're feeling as other people might see it, when we're feeling a bit down, when we're feeling a bit kind of life is perhaps proving a challenge, and we're sharing the ways in which that's happened. Maybe we've run out of money this month and we're kind of thinking we've got to get a new job, and we share that with someone, and or we've had a difficult time with our partner or with our kids or at work with someone, and we're sharing that with someone, and we're sharing that that's where we're at the moment. But the most effective way that anybody can ever be supported in that is just to have someone who's willing to listen, but not someone who feels they've got to take it on and carry it away for us. And this is the thing that often what's seen as the consequence of listening to an energy vampire, as they're described, is that the person who's listening says they've had all their power and their energy sucked out of them. But no one can suck energy or power out of you. It's only if you take on their stuff that then you carry it away with you afterwards. And you can't carry other people's stuff. So it's only in your mind that you're carrying it away. You're not actually having the energy drained out of you, or we're not having it drained out of us when that happens. It's that sometimes we carry away some kind of self-imposed expectation that we've got to fix this person's life for them, when actually they're quite capable of fixing their life for themselves. But when we've experienced that, we say they suck the life out of us. No one can suck the life out of us. That's a delusion that means it's our way of kind of explaining to ourselves how kind of worn out we feel afterwards, and we project that difficulty onto the person who shared their negativity, as we're describing it, with us. But we always have the capacity to listen to someone and be in that person's presence without feeling we've got to deal with their stuff afterwards. And what's not recognized quite often in such situations is that actually that kind of experience is actually an opportunity. The second half of the tagline that I speak of is growth through conflict. And when we have those difficulties, it means that we have an opportunity to learn something about ourselves. We can look at, well, why did I find it difficult speaking to that person? What can I do to support myself in the future if I come across a similar experience, so that I don't have to keep running away from that kind of experience? I don't have to hide inside my house in case I come across people like that. It gives me a chance to learn something about myself. And in a sense, as I kind of looked a little bit more into this kind of what I see as kind of quite an unfortunate way of kind of looking at how to kind of deal with such situations, is I came across a lot of the work of Carl Jung, and particularly an article by a lady called Nikki Sapp, who I haven't been able to find much more about, to be honest. I'll put a link to the article in the information below, but she's written a great article which refers to a lot of the things that Carl Jung says about these kinds of things. And there's a couple of quotes that I'm going to read out, and I'll put them on the screen for the YouTube watchers as well, but I'll read them out to make sure that the podcast listeners as well get a chance to hear these, and two phrases that he said were, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And another one he said on a kind of similar vein was, we meet ourselves time and time again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. And sometimes people might say, oh yeah, these kind of namby-pamby phrases. Uh, but the thing about that is, it is what the essence of when we resolve conflict, when we move through the challenges that we face in interacting with other people. It is what we do. We can benefit from the experience of interacting with someone whose views and opinions or ways of being we find to be difficult, because ultimately it's the way in which we meet ourselves. Normally, if someone's complaining about something, it's because actually maybe we've got a similar difficulty, and the last thing we want to do is hear that somebody else has got the same difficulty, because we're struggling enough to cope with our own difficulty around that issue. And so it's not the case we have to take on their issue as well, simply because they've told us about it, but it can highlight for us, well, why did I find it difficult to hear what that person had to say? And actually, quite often we'll find, well, that's because I've had similar difficulties and I didn't know how to cope with it myself, so I really can't cope with hearing them talk about it. But what that then does is it flags up for us something that we can look at. Well, it's like, well, actually, if I'm finding it difficult to even think or talk about this thing, it must be a problem that I've got to deal with. For me, not for this person's. I've got no responsibility to deal with their problem. But the very fact that they've caused this kind of, or my experience of them has led to me feeling a certain way, means that it flags up for me something that I can learn about myself. And this is the way in which Jung says we meet ourselves time and time again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. And what it means from that is that when we come across these situations where someone says something that we find difficult, we can notice that actually, well, why is that the case, and what can I learn from it? And actually it means that by engaging with that person, it gives us more and more opportunities to learn more about ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean to say I'm saying we should therefore, instead of keeping away from this person, we should actively seek them out and sit down next to them as much as possible. But the very, in a sense, lucky encounter that we've had with that person has been to flag up something that we can look at in ourselves. So it becomes an opportunity to look at what we can still work on and develop within ourselves. So instead of blaming this person for sucking the life out of us when they can't do that, we can only give our energy away to people if we choose to. And as I say, that's usually because they say something that we don't like to hear, and then we carry that thinking about it afterwards. But it's not them that suck the life out of us, it's us not dealing with something that we're already carrying. It gives us this chance to just look at, well, why is that the case? Why is it that what irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves? How can we take advantage of that idea and think, okay, so what was it about this person? What can I learn from that? And in time, whether just individually or through talking it through with someone else, we actually come to learn that we can still be in the presence of people with that difficulty, because we've come to a kind of place of peace, as I often call it, within ourselves about it. But if we keep running away from it, by running away from and staying away from these negative people as we describe them, we're continuously abdicating the responsibility we have for dealing with our own stuff. And in a sense, it's us that goes into denial about this stuff, because we're not wanting to acknowledge that this person's just being who they are. We're interpreting them as negative, and we're kind of, instead of actually thinking, well, why did I find that so difficult to listen to? And, oh, well, actually, yeah, they were talking about something that I've had a struggle with as well, or they were talking about something that I find difficult to talk about myself. And so actually, what can I learn from that for me? So as I say, it's not as if we've got to kind of fix this other person like we're responsible for them, But what we can recognize is that put a mirror up to us that means we can start to learn something about ourselves. So they're actually gifts for us to meet people who kind of bring, who we kind of feel that way about, that have kind of meant that we feel a certain kind of reaction towards them. And so we can then look at, well, what is it I can learn for me about that, so that I can still be in the presence of people who speak about those things or who act in that way, but I don't have to kind of run away or stay away from them, and I don't have to project negativity on them and say they're negative. Well, actually, it's just as much me that's being negative about them. So if we use it as an opportunity for learning and change and growth and understanding of ourselves, or learning, connection and insight, which is what I describe as the three cheers for conflict, the three benefits that conflict can bring for us, if we can use it in that way, it actually becomes a really positive thing. Because as I say, at the end of the day, we're not responsible for the fact that that person is having challenges, but we can recognize that within ourselves we're experiencing similar or kind of analogous challenges, and it can flag up for us that we haven't come to a place of peace about them. We haven't resolved our conflicts, our inner conflicts about those things. And so, in a sense, as I say, they become, some people talk about people like that being angels, or, as I say, presenters of gifts to us, because we actually can learn a lot about ourselves from it. Or, as Jung says, they can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But as I say, the counter side to kind of following that kind of guidance, stay away from negative people, or recognize energy vampires so you can stay away from them, is that basically we just hide ourselves away in our homes or in our office or in some kind of small space, because to go out means we risk coming across those people. But we're always going to come across those people. So do we want to constrain ourselves? Do we want to put ourselves in that kind of prison, and see, it's almost like a kind of an apocalyptic view where there's all these vampires out there, that we've got to stay inside and protect ourselves from, whereas actually they don't pose a threat to us, but they do give us an opportunity to learn something about ourselves, that we can see that actually the negativity we're seeing in them is our view of negativity, our negativity projected out onto them. And it gives us a chance to think, well, what can I do to help myself in such situations? So yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that. I want to kind of really challenge this idea that that when we see negative people, that first of all they're no more negative than we are, and that they're not energy vampires, because no one can suck the life out of us, but we might carry away an expectation of ourselves that we've got to do something about their problem, and that's how we wear ourselves out, by thinking we've got to fix other people, but we blame them because we're not acknowledging that it's our response to what they've said. So the idea of staying away from negative people and avoiding energy vampires is a very, in a sense, self-defeating way of looking at the world and looking at other people, because in the end we become very negative, or we kind of magnify our negativity that we see about other people. We stay indoors and we don't go out because we might bump into these negative people as we see them. And its consequences really can be that we live a life of isolation. I mean, I'm kind of reminded of another social media post I saw the other day, where a lady said, I've reached this place in life where I've keep seeing other people as being kind of the problem, and so I've kind of cut off ties with all sorts of people who used to be friends, and now I've come to a place where I don't really have many friends anymore, and I've had to realise that actually a lot of the problem was me. Now, that lady had gone through a lot of painful experience and had a very long period of pain because she was always cutting ties with people that she said she came to depend on or see as friends, but then they did something that upset her, so she cut ties with them. And the point is, sometimes friends will do things that we don't like, or people will do things that we were depending on them not to. And if our only response is to cut ties with people and avoid them, then eventually we will have no ties with anyone, and we will end up feeling isolated and lonely. And we may or may not come to recognize that that's been a recognition that's been caused by us. But the only way out of that is to recognize that that's been caused as much by us as anything that the other person or people have done. And so this is the downside to looking out for negative people and trying to avoid them, because we're all negative at times, or could be perceived as negative by another person. And if our only response is to stay away from people like that, and to think that somehow they take our power away from us and they tire us out, we're abdicating our own personal power. We're not acknowledging that we have our own personal power to look after ourselves in those situations, and that actually we can be in the presence of those people and not feel anything difficult about it. And we can actually see that their ways of expressing themselves or of behaving can actually be a gift to us to understand something about ourselves. And as I say, that doesn't necessarily mean we actively seek them out, but when we do come across people that way, who behave in a way that brings that feeling up in us, or we create that feeling within ourselves more correctly, it gives us a chance to look at ourselves and think, well, why did I feel that way when I was in that person's presence? But if my only response is to say, oh, well, I'm never going to go near them again, I can't control that, because even if it's not that person, I'm likely to bump into other people who are like that in the future. And if I keep saying the problem is them and they cause me to feel bad, I'm not acknowledging that actually I'm the person who creates my own feelings, and I'm also the person who creates my own choices about how I go forward in life and how I deal with those kinds of experiences. So I have the power to deal with that. But if I say it's all about them, I'm abdicating that power, and I'm making myself feel powerless by seeing things that way. And while the intention of those kinds of videos is to kind of, I guess, to help people to think that they can look after themselves better and feel better in life, it actually leads to people feeling powerless. It actually leads to people seeing only negativity out there in the world, because people are just being people. And if we project onto them that they're negative or that they're energy vampires, we will end up doing that to a large number of people, and then become, as I've put in the title, kind of almost agoraphobic, that we don't dare go out because we might experience a difficult experience, or have a difficult experience out there with someone who's negative. So I'm going to come to an end there. I hope it's stimulated your thinking. I hope it's challenged your thinking. Either way, please make a comment in the box below. Please give a thumbs up to it if you like the video. Please give a thumbs down to it if you didn't like the video. If you think I'm talking rubbish, please subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Please share it with other people if you think they might be interested. Yeah, I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you have a good day. Thanks very much for listening and watching. Bye bye.